Susan, welcome back. We are continuing our playthrough of Our Life Beginning and Always. We're continuing where we left off last time with the last moment of step 2. We're going on a road trip, guys. Are you all ready? Are you all prepared? I'm not ready, but I'm also just super excited. Let's get a move on. Even though you were awake, the sun had barely peeked its head above the horizon and the sky above was still dark, though lightening by the minute. Usually you wouldn't be up so early, especially during summer vacation, but today was different. Today, instead of the lazy days you were used to, everything around you was a flurry of activity as both your family and Cove's prepared for what lay ahead. Oh, because parked in the street just outside your house was a massive RV camper, so big you couldn't even see Cove's house behind it. His parents had rented the RV for a few days to take him on a short road trip to see the Redwood National Park. You glanced at Cove, who was standing nearby, taking in the scene in front of him. The prospect of the trip had been a mixed bag for him, but it was only 3 days, so it seemed like he was dealing with it as best he could, especially now that you and your family were joining him. You weren't sure how exactly it happened. You knew your parents and Cove spoke to each other often, and somewhere along the way, plans were made after Cliff offered to share the space. The parents all thought it was a fantastic idea. You had already gotten a good look inside while helping load everything in, and you had to admit that while it was a really big car, fitting that many people inside was going to be snug.
Let's go.
Move it or lose it, kiddo. Mom bustled past with a cooler in one hand and a large bottle of water under the other. She was upbeat for this early in the morning. Ma, however, seemed to be on the other side of the wavelength. She followed behind her wife, dragging her feet on every step. I'm gonna need a whole jug of coffee once we hit the road. It was way too early. You yawned and rubbed at your eyes, still sleepy from the early morning wake-up call. The air outside was still damp from dew, and that helped to make you a bit more alert. And then at the end of the chain came your sister. She had a bone to pick before the trip officially started. Her rattling off critiques added some level of normalcy to everything new going on.
Ugh.
I don't get why I can't sleep on the bed tonight. Blue is the youngest, and I'll never fall asleep in that loft. We're trying to make things fair on everyone. If you want to play the older card, you should be offering to take the loft for both nights. It's important for big siblings to make sacrifices for the younger ones. Elizabeth huffed, not happy with the answer in the slightest, and folded her arms, leaning back against the side of the RV. The trip plans had been nailed down prior, the sleeping arrangements included. Elizabeth still held on to her objections with them. There was the main area of the RV with the couch, loft, and some floor space. At the end of the car was a room with a large bed. Your moms were sharing the bed, Cairo was on the couch, and father and son intended to sleep on the floor. The adults determined you and Elizabeth would switch between the small loft above the driver's seat and sharing the beds with moms. Yeah. I think it's unfair that Cove has to sleep on the floor. After all, it was supposed to be a trip for him and his family before yours ended up coming along too. Now he'd been kicked out of every bed-like space and put on the floor. There had to be another way to organize things so it was better for him. I could sleep on the floor or whatever for one night so Cove could have a turn in the loft instead. You announced your idea to the group and everyone paused from what they were doing to consider it. Cove was taken aback by the consideration, like he hadn't thought about how he had clearly gotten the short end of the stick.
No.
There's no way you'd be sleeping in the back while I'm with moms. There's barely enough room for 3 and we can't add a 4th. Then I can be on the floor for a night so that he'll be on the floor for one night with Elizabeth when Elizabeth is in the loft.
Sorry.
Oh, no can do, Blue. Sorry. The 3 of us all together down there is a bonding time. Cliff put one arm around Kyra's shoulders, then one around Cove, dragging the both of them to him. They smiled at his little show. I'm afraid I can't extend you an invite. You simply have to take the loft. Cove and his mom both shook their heads at Mr. Holden, and you had to agree that it was a pretty weak excuse as far as excuses go. They were just being hospitable to your family.
Don't worry about it.
Thanks, Blue. It's all right. I can take the floor for 2 nights. Ah! And that settled the matter for good. All right, you lot. Does everyone have everything they need? We're heading out in 5 minutes, so now's the time to double check. You don't want to forget something important. At the word, Elizabeth yelped and dashed back into the house, her bedhead hair bouncing behind her as she went. Ma came over and gave you a smile, settling her hands on her hips. How about you, Blue? Do you have all your clothes packed, toiletries, deodorant, floss, anything else you can come up with? I am confident I had it all. Want you to make sure everything was organized and ready to go. You had packed the night before and set your alarm too. Yep, I'm good. That's great. We'll have to wait for the ones who weren't as organized. But we'll be heading off shortly. With a few minutes left to spare before leaving, you mentally went over what you had packed for the trip. Clothes, a pillow, blanket, usual day-to-day gear for most people. You also had more personal things, such as... I'm taking the pajama shirt. The fact that that's an option. You wanted to have something comfortable and special to wear on a trip like this, and you wanted Cove to know you were still using it. I think the camera? Just a little pocket camera you'd gotten from your mom's, but you couldn't miss the opportunity to take some new snaps. Pencils and paper you had prepared in case you saw something to sketch at the park, or if you had to write anything down, or if you needed to pass time just doodling. Some things to read. You'd packed one of your old favorites and a new one you never tried before. You knew you'd have plenty of time for them both on such a long drive. And the stuffed animal. Without fail, it always made you feel more comfortable wherever you went somewhere new. It was like taking a little piece of home away with you. That was everything. Hey, let me take that for you, Blue. I'll stow it in the RV. There's a few spots left. It'll fit. You let Kyra take your bag and gave her a grateful smile. With nothing left to do, you watched as the others getting ready for the trip. Kyra and Cliff seemed to have the most energy of anyone. They were finishing packing the suitcases away while your moms had gone to lock up the house. They high-fived whenever another one got crammed into the storage compartments of the vehicle. Even though your own parents were more low-key than Cove's, you could tell they were both excited for the trip. It had been a while since your family had been away anywhere together. Elizabeth skipped towards the RV, a bag slung over her shoulder, and you were surprised to see she seemed more optimistic about the whole ordeal now. Usually, she wasn't one to exit the confines of her room unless it was for TV or food, or to leave her family behind to be with friends. You would have thought 3 whole days packed in an RV with 6 others would be too much for her, but it was a nice surprise. You supposed any vacation was better than no vacation in her mind. Cove had been pretty quiet so far, and more than anything seemed overwhelmed by the situation. It was great to get away and explore new places. Soon, the miscellaneous remaining tasks had all been wrapped up. Everyone piled into the RV and it was officially time for the trip to start. And it did. Cliff took the first shift driving. He cautiously navigated the massive car out of the narrow neighborhood streets. It was touch and go for the first part of the journey. Your moms and Kyra were all huddled at the front, trying to get a view of how much space they had on each side. There was a sense of relief when the first long leg of the trip was hit, and the RV only needed to go down one stretch of highway for miles. The mom group cleared out of the driver's area, leaving Cove's dad to it, taking more comfortable seats around the main cabin. You felt like you could finally relax now, too. Time slipped by as morning faded away. Before you realized it, the engine of the RV came to a stop, but only halted for a few moments as Cliff climbed out of the driver's seat and Mom took over. Ma was sitting shotgun, giving Mom a quick tutorial on the controls, as it was her first time driving anything this large. Blech. Cliff groaned. I said Cove, it's Cliff! Cliff groaned as he headed towards the rest of you, stretching his arms above his head and loosening his muscles. We're making good progress! Yeah, maybe you should take a nap in the back for a while. That was a long haul you just did, and I know you're on less sleep than usual. Cliff waved a hand, a trademark grin of his slipping into place. I don't need sleep. I got a few miles in the old tank. He flexed an arm, showing off his muscle to drive the point of how resilient he was at home, Kyra rolled her eyes in amusement. Dad, everybody has to sleep. Cove groaned at the tough guy act, though Cliff simply chuckled and ruffled his son's hair.
So?
Are you gonna be driving again anytime soon, Mr. Holden? I wanna know so I can prepare. Did anyone pack some rope? I might need it. There's no seatbelts in here. Elizabeth called down from where she was lounging in the loft above the driving compartment. She was laying on her back as her hair falling over the side, swinging around as the RV started up again and took off down the road. A bag of potato chips was balanced on Elizabeth's stomach, and she tossed a couple in her mouth. Right as Cliff held a hand to his chest, pretending to be offended by the remark, Kyra laughed lightheartedly.
Don't worry about it.
Lucky for all of us, we have enough adults to cover shifts today. He won't be driving again until tomorrow. Just enough time to write up my last will and testament. You too. The rest of the group laughed while Cliff pouted, and you gave him an apologetic shrug. Mom then shouted in her seat to join in the conversation, a playful smile tilting her lips. What I'm more worried about is this old monster getting us there and back again before falling apart. It looks as though it was built in the early 90s. It must be older than some of the occupants. That's just the aesthetic of the decor. It's not that old, I think. Did you ask what year the model was before you rented it? Kyra wrinkled her nose in thought. Hey, yes I did. I just can't remember what the answer was. Cliff chuckled at her while the rest of you let out a collective sigh. The RV lurched a little as it picked up speed, and you held onto the ladder to the loft to keep your balance. You felt something graze the top of your head before the weight settled on your blue hair. When you tilted your chin up carefully to look, you heard the rustling of a bag of chips and realized Elizabeth had rested the end of it on your head. She gestured to the opening, silently offering to share her snack. I'm going to take a handful. Reaching up, you scooped up some chips after the weight of the packet left your scalp. You happily munched away as the conversation continued on as you got closer and closer to your destination. The day flew by with the group of you chatting, playing games, and passing the time together before finally arriving at the park and setting up for the night. Ma was closing the windows while everyone got ready for bed. Saying goodnight to the others, she made her way to the back room. You had all had dinner together while still driving, and some hours after had arrived at your destination and found a spot in the park there for the rest of your stay. Giving a look across the front of the RV, you noticed almost everyone was already dozing off where they were, with Cove having completely fallen asleep curled up in the passenger seat. He must have done so while Kyra was driving the last leg, and they had decided not to disturb him. Kyra herself was the only one who was still awake, flipping through a magazine next to the portable light from her spot on the couch. It seemed Mr. Holden needed to sleep despite his claims. You followed your moms into the back room and closed the door behind you before crawling into bed between them. It was a queen-size bed, so there was enough space for the three of you together without too much squishing.
Good night.
Kiddo, good night. Good rest, Blue. We've got a big day ahead of us tomorrow.
That's fantastic.
I'm looking forward to the bushwalk in the morning. It's been a long time since I was out in nature like this. There will be plenty for us to see. You stayed awake for a little longer while your moms whispered about the park and forest in general. With the sound of their voices in the background, eventually you nodded off to sleep. The next morning, you were up bright and early preparing for the day ahead. You fell asleep before you knew it and woken up rested. Ma whined about the firmness of the mattress, but Mom had only encouraged her to enjoy the trip while she could. While looking at the spot to get ready, you had some trouble finding space of your own, as the others were doing the same thing. Cove was perched on top of the counter, brushing his hair and tucking up his legs every time someone wanted to move past. The parents were checking, double-checking, and triple-checking that you had everything, to the point where you had to stop listening to them altogether. You knew you wouldn't be returning to the RV at all that day, but the look at the backpacks were packed up and ready to go, you doubted anything was missing from them. It didn't take much longer until you all exited the RV in a bustle and headed into the Redwood National Park.
Wow.
I know, Cove! Cove had his head tilted up towards the canopy trees, his eyes wide as he took the massive trunks on either side of you. You knew the redwood trees here were considered the tallest trees on Earth, but you weren't prepared for how exactly huge they would be in person.
Come on.
Smile, you two! You spun just in time for Kyra to snap a picture of you and Cove together, before she pointed her camera at Cliff, trying to get a shot despite his weak protest that she should just enjoy the moment. Your parents were walking behind the group a little, with Mom telling Ma some information she had read about the park in the brochure. Ma listened happily while looking around and taking in the sights, every now and then asking a question or making a joke about something Mom had said. You smiled at them, thinking your moms must have read a lot of pamphlets to know so much about the park. Maybe you should come and work here as a tour guide if you know so much about the place. Elizabeth teased and earned a squeeze on the nose from your mom. She seemed to be enjoying herself, but you thought that might just be because she was amused by everyone else's reactions. Surrounding you on either side, the enormous trees shot up into the sky, the sunlight peeking through their canopy and speckling the path in front of you. The sheer size of the redwoods made you feel like a tiny ant bustling along through the forest. The adults had decided on some casual nature walks rather than any serious hiking, and you strolled along at your own pace, taking in the scenery. Elizabeth sped up a little, smirking at Cove as she fell into place between the two of you, and immediately you could tell by her expression she was going to say something taunting. I can't believe our families are actually on vacation together. She threw her arms out, speaking with a genuine sense of bewilderment. I would have joked about something like this happening, but now I'm not sure I want to give them any more ideas. Cove ignored her completely and continued walking along. Just watch. Next year they'll be talking about their next new amazing idea. She put on a fake voice deeper than her own. We should just sell both our houses and move in together. Think of how much we'd save on the mortgages. It was clear that Elizabeth was being sarcastic. Cove simply shook his head, not really bothered by her. You supposed he was used to this by this point. But seriously, they really do act like we're a single family just because we live across the street from each other. I think it's more than me and Cove are so connected. So shut up, Elizabeth. Shut up. Elizabeth gave you and Cove a look, her eyes glitching. She's gonna say that, isn't she? Mischief as she leered at you.
Yeah.
Maybe one day we will be related, legally anyway. She said it as though she was a gossipy old lady, but she almost immediately dropped the tone and nonchalantly said her real thoughts. But at least that's what Mom thinks. Cove still blushed, which made Elizabeth smile triumphantly, as though it was her whole purpose for teasing him. Then he mumbled quietly, refusing to make eye contact with either of you. I don't know why you think you're so funny when no one else does. I'll marry you, Cove. He looked at you in disbelief. He genuinely could not believe that this is where the conversation had gone. I expect you to give me an answer sooner or later. I'm being very confident right now. Allow my insecurities to go away, Cove, and live in the moment. Cove frowned and reddened harder, but pretending to ignore what you were saying, your sister noticed what was happening. Ooh, he isn't going to engage in this topic! He groaned at the continued teasing and increased the speed of his walk. The day continued on with plenty to see and experience. You passed a few different activities that you would have liked to try out if you had time, such as kayaking and rock climbing, but Ma said that would have to wait for another trip. There was a little stream during the walk that you sat beside and set out a picnic for lunch, nibbling on a selection of fruit, sandwiches, and chips. Various birds flew by overhead, and you made a game out of guessing the species that were hanging out in the trees nearby. You even managed to get a couple of them right, including the kingfisher that grabbed half of Cliff's sandwich. It was definitely a special experience and one you'd remember for a long time to come. You smiled to yourself, committing the sights and sounds to memory. Your group made it back to camp just as the sun was setting in the sky and the stars were appearing one by one. Everyone had enjoyed different parts the most. You traded stories on what you thought while you were eating dinner, and then afterwards you pitched in to help clean up. You, along with Elizabeth and Cove, got to head back to the RV early and spend some time together while the parents stayed outside longer. nice to have space to yourselves after the cramped journey, and while Elizabeth had locked herself in the back room with her headphones, you and Cove were left in the main lounge area. I'm hanging out with Cove. Well, let's take a load off. We've got some time. You took a seat on the sofa while Cove sat down on the other side, tapping his fingers against his knees. Your cheeks warmed a little at that. Being close to him never failed to feel exciting. You'd seen Cove nearly every day for the past 5 years, but seeing him in a jacket was still somewhat unusual. In Southern California, he could get away with that. It was a simple difference from his normal style, yet you couldn't help noticing the way he looked right now. It looked great on him. In fact, Cove always looked nice. When Cove cleared his throat, your eyes snapped to his. He had an eyebrow raised and had clearly caught you staring at him.
What?
Is everything okay? You just look so good now. Let's be confident. Cove immediately blushed at the unexpected compliment. What? He didn't say anything more than just a one-word question. You decided to elaborate further. You know, I hardly ever see you wearing a jacket, especially in summer.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I like wearing as few layers as possible. It's easier that way. I'd rather be cold than extra hot. It's kind of a pain to carry extra clothes around. My parents made me bring this jacket. It looks really good on you. I don't mind either way. I just dress depending on the weather or how I'm feeling at the time. Cove smiled lightly at you and nodded. I've noticed. You perked up hearing that. He noticed you too? I want it. We're going for this. Cove, you better give me an answer. I'm gonna do it. Let's do it! So what types of clothes or accessories do you like to see on somebody other than you? Cove's eyes widened at the question, and his defensive reply seemed to slip out before you had the chance to properly think about it. Damn it, Cove! Why can't you just give me an answer?
No.
Oh, you poor boy! Oh, you poor boy! Oh, poor boy! I'm not gonna continue laughing at you. A short snort of laughter escaped you, even though Cove's face flushed red. You could see the hint of a smile on his lips, too.
Come on.
That's not what I meant. You composed yourself and sat up straighter, all traces of laughter disappearing from your face. Answer with what you do mean then. Isn't there anything at all you think looks good when you see it on someone? Cove mumbled under his breath and you couldn't quite catch the words. He was having a difficult time with the subject. I swear I won't make fun of you. I just thought it would be fun to talk about. I swear I won't make fun of you. That's not really it. Cove seemed pretty grumpy about your statement, but you weren't ready to give up so easily. Please. Cove sighed and looked down at his lap where he was fidgeting with his hands, still reluctant to give an answer.
I don't know.
Oh, Cove, you made an unimpressed sound over how this was going. Are you sure? Maybe, I don't know why you'd want to talk about that with somebody else. Cove was never one to gab on about himself, and you were almost convinced he'd stubbornly hold out. But then his shoulders slumped and he caved into your questioning. Fine, I guess I kind of like ankle bracelets. Oh, you adorable boy. Thank you. Ankle bracelets? Yeah, everyone can wear a pretty bracelet. Wrist ones are cool too, but they're pretty normal. There's something fun or flirty about ankle bracelets. Cove, stop being so adorable. God, it's more special or something. I don't know how to explain it. Cove brushed his knuckles against his cheek awkwardly, seemingly unsure where to go from here. So you think there's something? I don't know what to say. I like them too. Thanks for it. Let's go with I like them too. Cove smiled at you, happy to hear he wasn't the only one who felt that way. When he said nothing else, you took a moment to gather your own thoughts. Oh. You had a couple different ones at home. With this new knowledge, you might slip them into your daily outfits in the future. Cove looked away again, feeling awkward about this. You gave him an understanding look. And usually he would start to smile like normal again, but not this time. His expression only stiffened more. You were surprised to see him like this, as he always bounced back pretty quickly after being flustered. Cove? Still, he wouldn't look at you, and now his breathing was growing tense. It began to click. He was trying to build himself up enough to say something hard for him. You waited for it silently, until finally he peeked your way through the corner of his eyes. You were fully attentive by this point for whatever he was going to mention next.
That's...
People having brown eyes? That's also something I like. Oh, baby boy! Oh, baby boy! Oh, baby boy. I love you, Cove! God darn it, Cove! You adorable! Look at this boy! He adorable! For a moment you were stunned and at a complete loss for words. That was definitely not where you imagined this was going. Cove faced you head on, his expression full of desperate meaning. You got the instinct impression that he hadn't chosen that just because he liked the color brown. He chose it entirely because it was your eye color. Was he trying to flirt with you? That was all you could think. Your legs felt like jelly and you wondered if you might fall right off the couch. What do you like for another person, Blue? Blue eyes? Oh. Look at his blush! Oh. Cove blushed deeper shade of red and his mouth fell open, acknowledging that you'd used the same line back on him. Now you were both flirting with each other. He placed his hands on his lap and looked down. It seemed he hadn't expected to get this far and didn't know where to go from here. With the topic abruptly dropped, Cove officially had no more to say on it. The parents all arrived soon after, each of them climbing into the RV, finding some place to sit down and rest their legs. Elizabeth, having heard the commotion, came out from the room for the first time since arriving and joined you all. You spent the evening chatting and playing a few games, enjoying the last evening of the trip together. Bedtime arrived within the blink of an eye. As the group hunkered down for the night, your mom did a final round to be sure nothing had been left behind. She explained that Cliff was going to start driving early in the morning like on the first day, but would be letting everybody else in the group sleep. There wouldn't be a need for all of them to get up. Now with the time to check, you hadn't left anything outside. You, as well as everyone else, were confident you had it all packed inside the RV, which meant it was time to get some rest before the journey home tomorrow. Your moms and Elizabeth said goodnight, heading to the back room while you climbed into the loft. Cove and his family got situated below in the previously set arrangement. You tried to get comfortable as a million thoughts were running through your mind. It was hard to believe the trip was practically over, and before you knew it, you'd be back in your own bed at home. It was short, that was for sure, but you got to see and do so much during your time here. All in all, it was a nice break away from home. The minutes ticked by silently. It didn't take long for the soft snores of Cliff and Kyra to drift up to you. They were asleep now. You wondered if Cove was still awake and decided to poke your head out from the loft to find out. Looking down the hall, you noticed Cove laying on his back, his eyes staring straight up at the ceiling. His seafoam hair was spread out on the sleeping bag. He must have felt you watching him because suddenly his eyes were locked on yours. It was difficult to see much in the dim light, but you could make out the crooked smile from his face well enough. Cove waved back, still smiling at you through the dim light. Come on over, Cove! Cove looked unsure about it, but you were happy to see him slowly start to sit up anyway. His sleeping bag rustled as he moved, though he tried to go slow, and froze up like a deer in headlights every time he made a sound, watching his parents for any sign of movement. Eventually, he managed to maneuver around his sleeping dad and make it up to the ladder, standing on the bottom rung when he looked up at you and whispered. He opened his mouth to speak before it closed for another second. Is that my shirt? Oh, you just realized that I wear the pajama shirt. Yes, it is, my dear boy. You mean my shirt. You gave it to me, and I'm using it. Okay, thanks. For what?
It's nice.
I don't know. Liking it, I guess? He was so sweet, you were feeling very glad to have brought it. Then Cove shook his head to refocus.
So...
Why did you call me? Do you want to come up? His eyes widened just so. You could only tell because he had come to where you were. Cove glanced behind him quickly at his sleeping parents before turning back to you. Okay. You broke out into a grin and scooched back as far as you could, making space for Cove to crawl in. He was very tall, so it wasn't a great fit for him, but he managed to squeeze himself in. Even if you weren't exactly tall, the loft was still a tight squeeze with the two of you there. Oh, he looks so pretty! He looks so pretty. You laid down next to each other on your sides, face to face. He got under the blanket a bit. One of his arms was nestled under his head for comfort. The other had nowhere to go, rested alongside his chest on the floor of the loft. Cove spoke to you softly. What am I doing here? You can sleep here instead of the floor. Cove raised an eyebrow, not having expected you to bring up the topic again. Look at his shocked expression. He looks so adorable. Guys, look at this boy.
It's okay.
You're still thinking about that? You don't have to worry about me like that much, Blue. But thanks. It's okay. I'm not sure about this. Cove swallowed loudly, and you noticed he wouldn't look you in the eyes anymore. It seemed natural to have him near you, and being close like this only made it better. You thought back to earlier in the evening when you and Clove had been talking alone on the sofa. He had definitely been flirting then, and now you were here. I'm gonna get closer to you. You inch towards Cove slowly, your legs pressing together in the very limited space. Cove's face flushed dark enough to notice even the most pitch black RV cabin. The hand resting on the front of him tightened, balling into a fist. Are you okay? You seem tense.
Yeah.
I'm fine. I mean, I'm not dying or anything. Cove's eyebrows bent up nervously, but his smile widened. He followed your lead and curled himself deeper into the loft, closer to you. He looked away as he did. There was almost no space left between he and you. Cove's breath tickled the side of your face. For a moment, you stayed together like that. Neither of you spoke a word, and when your eyes locked again, Cove seemed almost taken aback by the situation, as though it hadn't completely hit him what this was going to feel like to do this until just now. He opened his mouth to say something, but shut it tight before anything came out. You moved in even closer, eyes half closed as your lips inched towards his so slowly. Cove froze immediately and you could feel his body trembling against yours. Oh my god, you're gonna jolt, aren't you? You grew close enough to be one motion away from placing your lips together. Then all at once he bolted upright, completely forgetting the restrictions of the location and smacking his head against the roof of the RV with a loud crack, making you gasp aloud. Ow! Cove, are you okay? Cove didn't answer. He fell back onto the loft floor in a frustrated pile. He pressed one hand against his head and the other over his face as he groaned in pain. The sound of movements in the RV below startled you. When you looked over the side, you noticed Cliff had similarly shot up and was looking around wildly.
What's wrong?
Wake up, people! Something happened! Cliff reached over to where Kyra was on the couch and she whined as he shook her out of sleep deep enough to not be interrupted by the chaos. What's going on? And then the lights came on and you scrambled under the blanket to avoid being seen, but it was too late.
What?
Cove? Where are you? Blue, are you? Oh! It only took a second for Kyra to figure out where her son had gone, and you soon heard Cliff's chuckle as he too realized. You were warned there wasn't much space up there, bud. No, we weren't! That was not in any of this conversation! You did not bring that up in this conversation. We didn't have this conversation. I didn't talk about the loft in this conversation. You don't bring up things like that didn't happen in this conversation. God, Cliff! Cove groaned terribly again, but this time it was out of humiliation. He moved a hand from his sore scalp to also cover his shame rather than face his parents. Hey! What's with all the noise out here? To your horror, the door at the back of the RV opened and Elizabeth, as well as your moms, peeked their heads out into the hall. Is everything okay?
Sorry.
It's nothing. Sorry for waking you up. Oh, I'm still on full screen. Sorry about that. Cove curled into himself, completely humiliated as he apologized a couple more times. Not loud enough for anyone other than you to hear, though. You should get someone to check your head. That was bad. With another whimper, Cove pushed himself up onto his side. Probably. Kyra casually came over to the edge of the loft. She patted her son on the back. Come to Mama, baby. You can't stay there. There was no putting it off. Cove climbed down the ladder, his face still red as a tomato when he reached the bottom. His dad gave him a nudge on the shoulder as he passed, trying to hold back renewed laughter, and his mom pulled him over to give him his head a quick look over. After announcing it wasn't anything more serious than a bump, Cove shuffled over to his sleeping bag on the ground. He collapsed into it, not caring if he should be more cautious with his head right now.
Sure.
All right, show's over. Let's all get some sleep. You could hear the snickers from the back of the RV from your moms and Elizabeth. They really had been watching this unfold like it was a piece of entertainment. But at that, they quickly said goodnight and headed to bed. With nothing more you could do, you laid back down as the lights went off again. You stayed there completely still until sleep finally overtook you. When you woke up the next morning, it was to the rumble of the RV as it traveled along the long journey home. Blinking sleep from your eyes, you peeked over the edge of the loft slowly, trying not to be seen. Cove was sitting on the couch with his mom, the two of them talking quietly together. His head was hung low. You blushed when you remembered what it was like last night, just the two of you in the loft together and the way you almost kissed. Kyra suddenly looked up and caught your eye, and your face grew even hotter as though she simply smiled at you. You knew it was going to be a long, long time before either of you lived this down, if you ever did. ... Soon your moms and Elizabeth emerged from their room, dressed and ready for the day of travel. You spent most of the day hanging out together in the RV, savoring the last few hours of vacation. Kyra suggested a few different travel games she used to play with Cove when he was younger, and you all had a great time competing against each other. A little later in the day, you tried to talk to Cove about what happened in the loft, but he simply apologized and changed the subject. It was a bit too much for him to try speaking on, especially right now. You understood. When the RV finally pulled into your street, it was well into the night, and you were looking forward to crawling into your own bed after the last few days away. Everyone else must have been feeling the same because it was mutually agreed that unpacking and cleaning the RV could wait until morning. Once home again, you went straight up to your room and dropped onto your bed, shoes and all. The two of you had basically been living together for 3 days. It was nice. But you knew that it wouldn't be the last time the two of you would spend time together, and that thought comforted you. With those last few thoughts drifting through your mind, it wasn't long before you dozed off to sleep. Tomorrow, life would go on like normal. And there we have it, everybody! We have finished every single moment for Step 2. Next time, we continue on, and we finish Step 2 and move on into the next phase of our life with Cove. Thank you all so much for joining me. I will catch you on the flip side. Bye, everyone!